So with the shadow, the important thing about this, to clarify, and I said it before, was we often misunderstand it as the bits of us that are undesirable or unworthy. And the parts that we've repressed, denied, or projected onto others. That's certainly coming for a lot from the Freudian influence, whereas Jung brought up also about the best parts of ourselves are in our shadow, the parts that we don't feel worthy of acknowledging or unwilling to own, or we feel that people will shoot us down in flames if we said, I'm really good at this, you know. So it refers to the unconscious positive as well as negative aspects of our awareness, and it is essential to our self-care to take into account that self-care is about our own unconscious. It will impact our own unconscious, although naturally we can't directly access our own unconscious. So as I said before, most of us is unconscious, and so what we're consciously doing is going to have an impact there, and the unconscious is also going to be reciprocally impacting our consciousness. So shadow potentially hinders our development as carers and as fully functioning beings, because if we do carry a big aspect of rescuer or indispensability or special snowflake or something like that, and somehow or other it will manage us rather than we can manage it. And these disowned parts of ourselves, this is again using Wilber's, hierarchy, can be present in our pre-personal aspects, so even before we identified a sense of self, so very young, early developmental aspects of ourselves. The personal, how we conceptualize our eyes currently, and also the transpersonal aspects of ourselves. And any of these parts can disrupt our healthy functionality.
Do you have plotted examples of pre-personal, personal and transpersonal aspects?
Yeah. Okay, so pre-personal in terms of things that may have happened to us as children in our pre-verbal development that we don't have conscious memory of. To use an extreme example, there may have been some traumatic incident that we just block off because it's too painful, and it has an aspect, it can have a tendency to creep up later on in life. Something may trigger either another trauma, a loss, or tiredness, excessive, and it comes bubbling up for us to deal with.
Attachment stuff's in that kind of category.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of early attachment stuff would come into that. So personal stuff, like really even, unfinished business with a previous person in our, in your parish. Somebody else may come in with a similar type of problem or something about that, that constituent, did you call it? Congregant, yeah. Comes in, reminds you of that person, and immediately we're going to be triggered because that stuff that we haven't yet resolved or processed with that particular congregant is going to get in the way of us dealing, openly and cleanly with this particular person or situation. And transpersonal stuff, yeah, like if we do have, on the positive aspects, we're looking at our work as being, of service to others, and we may privilege service to others over being caretaking ourselves. We'll be martyring ourselves and in some way really damaging our self-care. On the negative, we may have really, narcissistic or ego-inflated sense of what we are doing in the carer's role, and that is going to impact our healthy functionality with those people who come in contact with us. So doing shadow work, we'll be doing, as what we've done so far, is shifting perspective all the time between I, we, and it, and so we can actually look and help us to really come to terms with or uncover unconsciously repressed or denied aspects of ourselves, which then get in the way of how we care for others. And it's a key ingredient, the shadow work, in ethically responsible self-care, because it actually helps us befriend those parts that we see are the lowest or the highest in us. So if we can actually own, for example, the parts of us that are, like for me, when I, can actually be okay and admit to those that I work with that I have a bossy part to my nature, and I give people that I work with permission to go, look, if you're feeling bossed around, please tell me, sometimes I'm just not aware of it. Then we can actually work with that. Whereas if I'm not conscious that I'm trying to boss them into doing stuff or making suggestions that I think are fabulous and they just don't think it applies to them, there's going to be a problem. So, that's in terms of lowest aspect, whereas before I used to find it very hard to admit that, it was just other people should do it that way. So... do you want to...
No, I was just thinking about the delegation conversation earlier.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Related.
Yeah. Okay, so a trigger, an awareness, a sort of red flag is when we have any reactivity without a clear understanding about what's going on, why it's occurring. It's probably something to do with shadow, and it can be across the spectrum from joy, yearning, desire, irritation, fear, anger, any of those. When we don't really know what's triggering it, is probably some shadow aspect, some unconscious aspect. And there are lots of practices that help us to identify the shadow, and they help us to integrate it. So supervision, our own therapy, spiritual mentoring are parts of those, but we can do lots of things, and I've got a graph at the end that I've compiled, and it puts these into a bit of a context, but working with our dreams, journaling, dialoguing with different parts of ourselves in our journal or with others, drawing, interacting with anything in any way that we can actually put that person. Say we've had a problem with somebody that we care, that came to us for help, and something in us was really stirred up. We can actually really literally go away, do some work on that, put them in the room, in some way, and we can relate to them and have other conversations with them and step into their shoes and have them relate to us. So any of these can actually bring up and enrich our understanding of why those emotions were coming up. And so this 3-2-1 process, again, which is in the ILP Integral Life Practice book, is one that we can do. And I won't read all of this, but it again refers to the first person, second person, and third person. And rather than give you the theory, which you will have because, this is going to be a PowerPoint that, you'll have access to the notes here. Maybe if we do the practice, because we're running out of time, and just see what comes up for you. And this is something that I think would be best if you write it out, because this is something that you can relate to later on and maybe keep adding to and enriching. And have you all got something to write on, pens and paper and things like that?
iPads and fingers.
So one of the things to know about this is that once we're actually familiar with doing this as a way of practicing caring for ourselves, self-care, we can actually do it in a minute or two. It doesn't have to be this laborious process, but it's good initially to actually write it out so that you can have a sense of how it works. It's like the baby steps. But in terms of psychotherapy, counselling terms, it's particularly useful when we have counter-transference or, a reaction in us to someone that we're working with and we don't understand it. It's a great way of working with that. So what I'd like you all to do as an individual is to think of a recent interaction with a person or a situation where you had a strong emotional charge, either positive or negative. Give you a moment.
And you won't have to expose it.
You won't have to expose it. That's really important. This is for you. That's why I'm getting you to write down in your own book. So does anyone not have a person or a situation? Good. Okay. You're all human. Okay, so imagine them in your mind.
Let's not jump to any conclusions.
Yeah. Okay. So in your imagination, face that person or situation. So actually create it visually in your mind's eye, because our emotional brain works with the 5 senses: seeing, hearing, taste, touch, smell. And I'd like you to describe that in your book in detail using 3rd-person pronouns, like he did said this, she wouldn't do this, they, it, okay, behaved in such and such a way. And this is done so that you can fully explore what initiated the disturbance. So you actually explain or write down what they did or didn't do, said or didn't say, what this thing did or didn't deliver for you. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Terrific. Okay, so that was 3rd person. Now in the 2nd person, I'd like you to talk to that person, thing, or situation, calling them by name, okay? Using 2nd-person pronouns like you or your as a way of entering into some sort of relationship with them and bringing them one step closer to you. So, for example, you did this, or you said that, or you wouldn't do what I wanted you to do, whether it's an animate or an inanimate object or situation. Now the next part of this 2nd-person section of shadow is give that person or situation a voice and allow them to speak back to you in response to any of these statements or questions that you've made to them, or comments. Imagine what it must be like for them, or that thing, or that object, to have heard and felt and seen what you've said or done to them, what you've just communicated in that first bit. Okay, and then the final part, I'd like you to be that person, thing, or situation. So this is like you are it. You are he, she, it. So in being it, write or speak using 1st-person pronouns. So like I heard you tell me this. I feel this. So see yourself coming from the perspective of that person or situation. Okay, and just in terms of your own reflection, do you see any commonalities at all? Anything that stands out? Anything that you've noticed doing this exercise that you wish to share without exposing the situation or anything?
Only that I tend to do a lot of the things that, piss me off when other people do them.
Terrific.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Good on you, Sean. That's what we see. It's like there's if there isn't a hook for something to hang on, it won't hang on it. Usually it is some aspect of ourselves somewhere or other that is we're seeing in the other person and they're triggering it in us, and we haven't yet found out some way to deal with it for ourselves, and they're it, and they really annoy us, or it really annoys us. Yeah, great. Thanks for saying that. That's very honest.
Yeah, I've got it on tape now.
We can fix that in post.
Okay. So does anyone else have anything to say, or can we move on?
So the unhealthy antidote to that is the special snowflake.
Right.
It's like, sure I do it too, but I've got a better reason to be doing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This person was much more annoying than,
Yeah.
Yeah, when they do it, it's annoying, but because I've got good reasons to do
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
it's
exactly.
totally
It's all
different.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
None of us ever do that, don't worry.
No,
It's
that's-
just you.
You're way beyond that.
Oh, of course,
Yeah.
above. Is
Yeah,
the
yeah.
word used,
Do you
above.
mind if I throw a thing in just on the end of the
Sure.
shadow piece?
Yeah, yeah.
From a clergy point of view, I think one of the obvious reasons to pay attention to this is in just in terms, as we'll say, empathy for people that we often find annoying, and that's true. That's a really good, to me, that's a really good reason for paying attention to shadow. But the other side of it is know thyself.
Yeah.
This is the parts of ourselves which we've got. We've built an entire ego around concealing, and when we take this hidden stuff in ourselves and project it on other people and try and make it hang there, it's writing out a possibility of getting to know a part of yourself that you haven't noticed.
Yeah.
So the reason not to project stuff on other people, to me, is not just being nice or being decent or being empathetic or being, whatever, but it's also not using that as an excuse to not get to know a part of yourself that you haven't paid
So
attention to.
that's a great point, Tim. So we become bigger and more comfortable with being able to have the not nice as well as the nice parts of ourselves. It's like we all have shit,
Mm-hmm.
So
We overquoted Walt Whitman yesterday, so perhaps he's in order again today. I am large, I contain multitudes.
that's right. Absolutely. Yeah. Great.